Hello, Mariangela. I'm going to say the way we say in Brazil, Mariangela.
I like that.
So and she does use the pronouns she, her, they, and them.
Thank you.
These are her options. I'm going to use she for today, but she's comfortable with any. She's my guest today on my podcast and my YouTube channel. She's a photographer, creator of Faces of Fortitude projects, a beautiful projects. I've had the chance to look at some of her pictures. And she's a mental health advocate. And for her, suicide is very, very personal. And I would like to start with that, Mariangela, if you don't mind, to speak about your own attempt. You were 17, I believe, at the time. And just help us understand a little bit of what was going on at the time in your mindset, because this is one of the questions we have survivors. I mean, what could be going through? What could they be going through to even contemplate the idea?
Yeah, I was raised in a very Catholic, very rigid Italian, 100% Italian family. And, you know, I know Brazil and other European countries are very similar in the kind of culture. And so I was raised in a way that didn't give me a lot of freedom and exposure. And so in high school, I was very sheltered. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very sad a lot of the time. And I was caught off guard by some boys one day, and I was sexually assaulted. And because of that, I had so much shame because my family didn't react well to things like that. So I had so much shame. I didn't want to tell them. I was afraid they would think I was a horrible slut and a horrible person. I was asking for it. So I thought my only way out was just to not be here anymore. And so I went home, and my mother is very ill with several different illnesses, and I took all of the medication that she had, and I proceeded to vomit on my bedroom floor. My sister found me half conscious, called an ambulance. My brother was there, and then went to the hospital. My stomach was pumped, given Epicac. The doctors asked me what happened. I told them. My mother had some not very nice things to say. And I just remember not ever talking about it again. Nobody ever really talked about it again.
And so for you, the drive at the time was shame. You didn't feel that
absolutely.
You had this space to talk about to your parents.
Yeah, I mean, sex, flirtation, dating, that whole area of your life as a teenager at that age, now we know is a healthy thing to talk about with our kids and something important to discuss. And but back then it was not discussed. It was not. If you don't discuss it, it means it doesn't happen. That was their mentality. So for me, it created a lot of issues sexually, emotionally, physically, because I wasn't able to talk about those things because I was told they were shameful.
Did they talk about the suicide attempt afterwards, or was it something just put under the rug?
Not a word. Not a word. I remember, a few family members being told that I was sick, that I was just in the hospital for a few days. Looking back, I wish we would have had a conversation with my brother about it, and we didn't. I think that he needed that.
How old was he at the time?
He was 11. So he was old enough to know. He was, he sat next to my sister next to me waiting for an ambulance. Like, he knew something happened. He didn't know I was trying to die. He had no idea. And I think maybe if he would have, our trajectory into the future with him might have been different.
And a few years later, what can you tell us the second part? Because suicide touches your life, has touched
it was actually
twice.
15 years later. So my brother went through all of his teens. He's 7 years younger than me. He was. And he was just like he was the golden child. He was the youngest, handsome, most talented, a valedictorian in his high school, prom king. All the girls loved him. All the boys loved him. He was very talented. And then he got into Yale. And we had a family, a little bit of a family drama happen. with the marriage of my parents and a little bit of a adultery scandal. Not a little bit, a lot of it. It was huge. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think that triggered him, because a woman that had been with him his whole life was all of a sudden gone, our mom. So I think that triggered some of his mental illness that was kind of laying dormant.
Yeah.
And he went off to college, and some red flags started in college, and he went to Yale. So we also just thought maybe he's just really eccentric. Maybe he's smart. You know, every time there was a red flag, I was like, is it a red flag or is he just really smart? I can't tell. Maybe I'm just not understanding him. Maybe he's being so confusing. And then the red flags started getting worse. Sorry, the dog is.
The dog.
Sorry.
The dog is missing someone.
Yeah,
I can tell.
It's not me, clearly. So yeah, the red flags were definitely there, and I started seeing
what kind of red flags? Can you give us examples?
Strange phone calls from the subway in New York, phone calls from driving across the country in search of a concert to go to, but he would say strange things. Like, he called me once when he was supposed to be driving home from New York across the country to Seattle. And he said, Mariangela, guess where I am? And I said, where are you? And he said, you know, when you have a book and you have a map and you open the book and there's that crease, I'm on the crease. And I was like, hey, buddy.
That's very symbolic, though, isn't it?
Yeah, he would say things like that, and you're not ever sure if he's being poetic or he's being, you know. And so the whole thing was very like, what am I reading too much into this? So that's kind of where we were, and then things started to get a little crazy because we all started communicating what was happening. So my red flags were also, other people were having red flags in my family. We finally started sharing our stories with each other, which this is a family that never talked about anything. So to talk about this was a huge thing. And we got all together and started sharing our stories. And I was flabbergasted because I was like, why has no one said anything up till now? Once people started sharing their stories, I was just like, what? Why aren't you guys talking? And nobody, I mean, people thought it was serious, but nothing huge was done about it. And my brother went away. He went on a trip. And looking back, I mean, hindsight is always 20/20 when we're talking about suicide.
I know.
But my brother, I believe, was undiagnosed schizophrenic, which was in the family. And he would go on these trips where he kind of reset his mind a little bit, which is very common in schizophrenia. And so he went to Peru, this great trip with a few buddies, and it looked like he had a great time. And when he came home, he was really great. So we were like, maybe he just needed a break. He got a job in Atlanta working for a nonprofit, and we were really excited for him. It was a big job working for AmeriCorps, you know, doing some work in the wilderness with some youth. Like, we were really excited for him. He got an apartment, he got a girlfriend, but every time he would send pictures, he was a little disheveled, but he was also like a hippie working on a mud farm. So you can never tell, are you disheveled and is there something wrong? Or are you a hippie that likes to braid his beard? Like, there was, especially when you're from Seattle, where that's kind of our look anyways. Yeah. It was really hard to tell where he was, especially because I couldn't get my hands on him. He was across the country. So he went into work one day on a Sunday to use their internet. And I was headed out of the country, and my sister was at home, and he sat down and wrote an email to my sister and I, which communication with my brother at that point in time was pretty complicated. When he called, you had to make sure you had time, because he would go into stories. There would be like theories, paranoias. It was a big conversation usually. So it was always kind of like, it's a lot. And my sister and I would always communicate, like, how did Jimmy sound? How does he doing? You know what I mean? And so he sent this email that was very chill, that was like, hey, just wanted to tell you guys I love you. I'm so excited to come home in a week, because he had a ticket to come home. He's like, my bag is packed. Can't wait to see you. Love you guys. That was it. And so my sister texted me and was like, that was shockingly normal. That's great. And I was like, yep, I'm jumping on a plane. I'll see you in 10 hours or 12 hours or whatever. And I was flying through Atlanta. And my connection, I had a 3-hour layover that was delayed. So my layover turned into 6 hours. And the friends that were traveling with us said, hey, doesn't your brother live here? You should, maybe they'll let him come to the airport for coffee, or you can say hi to him or something. And I just remember saying and thinking, I don't want to get into all that before my vacation. I'm not going to do that right now. Like, I am going on vacation. No. And he killed himself 6 hours later on that same day. And so he went after that email. Something set him off in his email. We don't know what it was. And he jumped out of the 9th floor of the office building that he worked, and he died instantly. And so I was in Israel, of all places. Wow. So it was actually great, because at that time I was part of a religion that I am no longer. That I was there kind of for a pilgrimage. And so it was actually really great to have that space to just grieve.
And the community to be there
and do nothing. And I didn't have bills. I didn't have to make my bed. I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to do any of those things. I just grieved, and it was great. And so it was definitely, looking back, I think that helped me a lot. So that's kind of my brother's story in a nutshell.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry about that. And when you were saying, no, I don't want to talk to him, no, I don't want to go into that before, it just reminded me the day before my father died, my sister asked me, do you want to talk to Dad? And I said no. And for so long, I questioned myself about that. I was just wondering if that happened to you.
So sorry. Yeah, I did several years of therapy over that. Because you automatically think, could I have changed it? Could I have stopped it? Could I have done something? And in reality, sure, you might have postponed it, but the problem is so much bigger.
Yeah.
Like, there is my talking to my brother that day, there's so much more underneath that I couldn't have even touched the surface on. Therapy, mental illness, drug use, all of those things that my one conversation in an airport wasn't going to heal.
No.
And so, yes, it's sad. But, it's interesting, because when I tell that story, and when I said that, I'm very prone to reading people and their body language now. And so I read it in you immediately that something had happened.
Yeah.
Because that's why this project is what it is for me, is that you and I are connecting at our painful moments. That's how people connect. We hear somebody's painful moment and we're like, oh, I have something like that. And then we want to connect with that person. That's what happens.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I love that you just mentioned your project, because although suicide is something personal because it happened to you in terms of you attempted suicide, so you've been there in terms of that degree of pain. It was your brother's suicide that actually sparked in you this desire to start and do something different and open up the dialogue surrounding suicide. So tell us a little bit about Faces of Fortitude.
Well, and to be clear, it took several years. I had a lot of spiraling after that. I tried to heal, and I first didn't go to therapy, and then I was like, oh, I need to talk to somebody. I need to talk this out. And a few years after he died, I started therapy. And then in therapy, I realized that I needed some purpose to what I was doing and to my grief process. And then I started doing work that was creative, and I worked for a company that I became a producer and was working around creatives all day, which really kind of lit a small flame in me. I was like, oh, this is exciting. This is great. And then one day, and a lot of large percentage of the people I worked with were photographers, but I was a producer. And I had an old camera in my closet, but I wouldn't have considered myself a photographer at all. And then a photographer came and did a lecture for an event. And she basically talked to us about starting a project that can help yourself heal from a tragedy and then help others, because she had started a project called called the Veterans Portrait Project. And she was a wounded veteran taking photos of other wounded veterans. And she walked us through all the details of how to come up with a project like this. And I just remember sitting there going, I wonder if I could do this. But then I was also like, I'm not a photographer, so I don't think I can. And I talked to her afterwards, and she was like, no, you actually could do this. And I said, I don't know anything about photography. I don't know anything about any of this. And she said, you could learn so quickly. And I really didn't. I think when she talked to me about it, I was like, okay, fine. I'll take a few pictures. There'll be a few family and friends, and then I'm not going to do anything else with it. And it exploded. And it just showed that people needed, you were talking about it earlier with the podcast, like people need this. People need this space to know that it's okay and safe to talk about something that society right now doesn't deem as safe. And so that's how it kind of started. And it started to snowball, basically.
So it was, the response was much quicker than you imagined.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think in the first 2 months, I realized it was going faster than I thought it would. And I got a little panicked, honestly. I was like,
you did?
Oh, yeah. I didn't think I could, because this was the old Mariangela. This is the Mariangela that wanted to fix everybody's problems, that is Italian, that thinks pasta cures everything, that, thinks that if you have a good nonna, you can, all your problems are okay.
Yeah.
And I think I had to realize really fast that I had to put some boundaries in place, that I had to provide a space. But my therapist was really fast to say, listen, your job is to not fix people. Like, that's my job. Don't pretend that you can do this, because you're not going to be able to sustain it. And that's when it started to grow faster, is when I was able to put things into place that were helpful to me.
So just so the listeners understand what the project is, so you go around, is it the US or the world, taking pictures of people who have been touched somehow by suicide?
Well, where I travel is a little bit that's complicated, because currently I'm based in Seattle. So that's where I know I can shoot easily and cheap or free. Because I'm not funded and I'm not a nonprofit. I'm just a one-woman show right now, one-person show. And,
I get it.
Yeah. And so right now, what I'm trying to make sustainable is to have these speaking opportunities, like the one that we were going to be part of. They pay me to come and speak about my project, or about suicide, or about things that I've learned. And then when I travel to those cities to speak, then I use my spare time, my spare resources to source a studio and to shoot people in that city. So like, I applied to be part of the early detection suicide conference in Rio. I don't think I got it, because it's this year and I haven't heard from them. But so that would get me to Brazil, because there are so many people in Brazil that want me to shoot, but I can't afford to travel to all these places. But I can be hired to do speaking events. I also do pop-up exhibits with the art, with the faces. And so when those things happen, they afford me the ability to be able to shoot in those places. But until then, I can't, unfortunately, travel everywhere. It's just not sustainable.
Sure. Do you find that this has been healing to you? And also, how has it helped these people, do you think? I mean, what is the process like?
Yeah. Oh, it's so helpful to me. I don't think I would keep doing it if it wasn't. When I was just in LA, I did 7 sessions in one day. And my sessions are 90 minutes usually. I cut them to 75 when I was in LA, because I wanted to fit as many people into those days as possible. But basically, it's 2 people sitting down talking about their problems. My camera's on a tripod. I have a remote, because I want to be able to look at you and talk to you when you're talking about something so serious. And I share my story first, and then usually people will do exactly what you do and tell me at what point they connected to the story and why, and then they'll tell me their story. And so it almost always works that way. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody that is either incredibly ready or not prepared at all. So usually someone will come in the door to the studio and start to sob, and they're too ready almost. And they don't even know where to begin, but it's good. I like that. And then there's people that aren't quite as ready as they think, and so it's a lot of work to pull out of them what I need for them. So it's definitely it's healing for me, because I learn so much about how different people heal. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because
how different things work for different people, right?
Yes, every single person does it differently. Which is, I always thought every once in a while I'll be like, oh, I've seen it all now. I've talked to everybody. No. There is always something different, and it's fascinating because it's real life. It's what we all need to do to take care of our minds and our bodies to get through trauma. But imagine if we each talked about it more often in like regular voices, what we could learn from each other, and how maybe the way you're dealing with trauma will help with how I deal with mine, and vice versa. I just think it could be so healing for all of us.
And I love that you use the word celebration of grief and trauma. That's a very unusual word to go together.
I know.
How did you come to that?
Well, it's funny. I think the word celebrate is important, because when you finally say words out loud that are so painful, you feel a release. You should have a party. You should celebrate yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you
let it out, right?
Well, and not only that, but you survived it. Like, what? Every once in a while, I will have somebody sit in front of me and tell me their story of harrowing survival and horrible loss, and they're sitting in front of me, and I look at them and I'm like, so you know that you got up this morning, you ate breakfast, you got your clothes on, you drove here, you're having full conversation with me and full sentences, and you are a functioning member of society. That's something to celebrate when you have gone through what you've gone through.
Yeah.
That's freaking huge. Yeah. Like, are you telling me that you just went through A, B, C, D, E, all these horrible things, and you're sitting right here?
What is their reaction? I can see people going, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I learned that is because it was told to me. My therapist looked at me and we unpacked. When I first went to her, my therapy story is funny because I didn't want to go to a therapist. I was always raised to, that you're only the weak need therapy. But I felt like it was something good for me. And I don't think everyone should subscribe to it. I think that there's certain personalities that can handle it. There's certain personalities that do better, with other outlets. And I didn't have insurance. And so I went and I found this sliding scale women's only therapist. Yeah. They weren't even licensed. They were getting their hours to become licensed. And I got paired with this woman named Katie. And I was mad. I was grieving. I was mad. I was not happy with myself. I didn't love myself. There was just so much going on. And I sat across from her, and she was and I was probably 35, maybe 36. And I sat across from her. She was this 24-year-old at the time, 25-year-old, blonde hair, blue-eyed little thing. And I just remember, sitting there and like crossing my arms and just staring at her.
Just wondering, right?
Mad. I was like, what are you going to tell me about my life? You don't know anything. You haven't even lived. Like, I was just mad. I was mad. And she blew my mind.
Really?
And she unpacked everything. And after a month, she looked at me and said, you survived a horrible rape. You survived your own suicide attempt. You survived a very vindictive and cruel mother. You survived the death of your brother. You have a successful marriage. You're a better mom than you ever had. You have a job. You came in here today. Have you ever celebrated all of that?
Wow.
And I was just like, no.
Wow.
She's still my therapist 9 years later.
Ooh.
She has her own practice.
And you helped her to get her hours.
Yeah. She's still, she's one of the reasons this project is, because every time I tried to quit, she was like, you're not quitting. This is important, but you need to learn boundaries, and your mother never taught you boundaries. So it's time to learn them.
That's a hard one, isn't it? And when I read the celebration of grief and trauma, and I also heard you speak, I don't know where, but saying that your friends will come to you and say, "Oh, what you do is so heavy," and I was going, "Oh my God, it's like talking about me," because I hear that all the time. Sometimes people ask me, "What do you do?" And I go, "No, let's just not go there today."
Yeah, it's funny. I actually had I've been part of these 2 different new like healing groups, and groups of like people that work in like the end of death field and the queer field. And so I'm always asked, just like everybody's asked, what do you do? What kind of stuff do you shoot? And it's very like casual. And I always say now, I'm about to bring the mood way down. Like, I'm just like,
are you really ready for this?
Yeah, are you ready for this? But in reality, it's not heavy for me. It's not.
I understand.
If anything, it takes a weight off because I'm able to talk about it that day. It's when I can't talk about it, or I feel like I'm not supposed to talk about it, or it's too heavy for people, that's rough. It makes you feel like there's something wrong, you know?
Yeah. I understand, and I feel the same way. People, I can tell that sometimes they want to avoid talking about it because they think it's heavy. And I said, no, I've been processing this for so many years, and I'm sure that you've seen this too. You talk about something and people are silent. They change the subject. They don't talk about it later, and then they call you. And they go, oh, remember that day that you were talking, the reason why I didn't, and then you find out that it just hit a chord.
Yeah. And it's always amazing to me, because either I'll get that or I will get a noticeable change in behavior. So I will get somebody talking like this, like you and me. And then when we start talking about that, if it's hit them in some way, I will hear their voice will lower, or they'll go like this. Their whole body, like their shoulders, and everything about it is shameful or sad or uncomfortable. And everything about their body language tells me something's wrong. And why? Is there something wrong? Like, why do we do that? That sets off such a chain reaction with people that I don't think people realize when they react that way, what they are doing.
No, because that's what we learn. I mean, we learn in this Western society that we have good feelings and bad feelings, avoid the bad ones and celebrate the good ones. And we have to stay there as much as we can, because there's just no space to talk about emotions, especially what people call bad emotions. There's no bad or good. They just are, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But we are brought up to just keep it inside, don't talk about it, and avoid emotions at any cost. And that's what you, with your beautiful project, is helping with. Open up the dialogue, talk about suicide, because this is it's a heavy topic, it's a hard one, but it needs to be out there. Enough of silence.
It does, and it's not anything that I'm going to change the world with. I think each of us needs to do it. Like, I think that we have to stop encouraging or allowing people to be silent about it. You know, and I think oftentimes I will talk about my project or mention it, and then I will have someone say something like, oh, I actually can connect to that. And that's all they'll say. And I usually am the one that says, if you feel like telling me more about that, you should. Like, just
there's nothing wrong with that.
Because I don't think anyone, let's be real, like, nobody is going to say, I want to hear all about your horrible trauma. Tell me all about it. That's exactly what I want to do with my day. Like, nobody's going to say that. That's stupid. Nobody wants to hear those things, but if we have the space for it and we can, I think, and if we understand, if you're in a place where you understand how healing that can be and how helpful it is, I think creating that space is easier than you realize.
And so you find so many people who need that space you open that door, right? Thank you, Mariangela, for your time, your beautiful project. And where can people find you?
People can find me. I think the most popular is Instagram, because that's kind of where everybody is right now. It's just at Faces of Fortitude. And you can also find me Faces of Fortitude Portraits on Facebook. And then facesoffortitude.com is kind of a hub for everything, which you can apply to be a face. You can see my local or, traveling schedule. You can watch the TED Talk. You can do all of that kind of on the website. So those are the best places to find me.
Yeah, they're beautiful pictures. Congratulations. And you say you're not a photographer. You fooled me.
Well, I am now. I can use that now.
Do you consider yourself a photographer now?
I do.
Okay, good.
It took some time, but I do.
They're beautiful. I just love it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for participating and sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Sure.